Just to be clear on how I installed the timing belt, I want to go over it. I start with the crank pulley lined up with the notch there, but the order I go in is from the crank pulley to the passenger side head. Set that one up because these two cam gears won't be under any tension, where on this side, the driver's side, there will be tension on the valve springs, which makes the side kind of difficult to get set up, because if you're off a little bit or you jerk it, these cam gears will spin and then you'll be misaligned with the timing marks. So you line up that notch, then you line up this notch right there, then this one as well, up with these notches and those ones right there. So to install this, you take your two 10mm bolts, just get them installed loosely. So most timing belt kits come with this piece of plastic, which is basically a guide. Slide it in there. And you go ahead and tighten them down. Pull it out. And that's it. Just make sure there's a gap underneath it and it's not touching. Now we're going to go ahead and put on the timing belt cover, which I'm not going to film. It's pretty self-explanatory. We'll put it on right. I had jumped the gun and started installing the intake manifold. Forgot I took this tube off. This is a coolant line for the heater core, which just runs down here. It'll pop out by the water pump. It has one bolt here and one bolt back here. Okay, now that we got that tube on, we're ready to install the intake manifold. I like to prop it up here. There's a few lines in the back you have to get plugged in. There's a coolant temp sensor, a couple of coolant lines that go to the throttle body. So we'll get those on as we go in. There's a coolant line right here that goes to that tube, which is coming from that heater tube we just installed. And then you got to plug in right here for your knock sensor. And the other two you want to get in are those two right there. The red one and that off-white one. And then that tube. The intake manifold bolts on with 8 bolts, 4 on each side. I'm not sure what the torque is on them. I just run them down with my impact. Get them started first, make sure you don't cross thread. On the front side of the harness coming off of the intake manifold, you'll have a few clips, splayed connector for your oil pressure sensor, crank angle sensor, and then a cam angle sensor here. Make sure you get all those plugged in. Double check around that nothing else is unplugged. And move on to the next step. Once you've got the intake manifold on, you want to install this EGR tube, which runs from the head to the EGR valve on the intake manifold. At this point, we're ready to put it back on the hoist, and from there we can do the flywheel and the clutch. We have a new pilot bearing for the flywheel. Simple as that. Get it flush with this surface and you're good. Pilot bearing on our flywheel. We're ready to put it on. Once you get all these bolts in, torque them to 52 foot-pounds in a crisscross pattern. A good trick to get these torqued, because it's going to want to spin on you. Grab one of the bolts for the clutch and use a combination wrench. And just snug it down. There you go. Use some brake clean to clean the surface of the flywheel before you put the clutch on. We're reusing the clutch that came out of the car because it still's got a lot of life on it. Just make sure the disc is facing the right way. It's usually labeled flywheel side or transmission side. It's nice that there's the dowel pins to assist you. Now that we have this on, go ahead and tighten it down in a crisscross pattern. Just torque the clutch, kind of do the same thing. Oh, just get it wedged in there. And the clutch is torqued to like 11 foot-pounds. My torque wrench doesn't go that low. So I'm just gonna snug them down. Alright, well that about wraps it up for putting the engine back together. Basically now we can put it back in the car. Alright, before we put our engine back in, we're gonna change out this throwout bearing with a new one. Make sure you reuse these clips, which it looks like I'm missing one. Ah, there it is, down in the grime. Alright, I got the new throwout bearing in there. Greased up the shaft with some basically brake parts grease, just some high temp grease. I got the power steering pump set to the side here. I have the AC bungee cord onto the fender there. Just get everything out of the way. Make sure you turn these because those will, I might just take that off because that might get in the way. Alright, we got the transmission supported with the jack stand. Or not the jack stand, but the floor jack and a piece of wood not to damage it. So as you can see, we have the transmission jacked up, and that is just so we can get the angle to get the studs off of the engine here into the holes for the transmission. Got it lined up, go ahead and put a couple bolts in. I put the two top bolts and then the two bottom nuts just to hold them together. And then we can go ahead and lower the transmission jack, and then we will lower the engine and wiggle it back to get the engine mounts to drop in. Alright, now that it's in, we're going to tighten down the engine mounts, all the bolts for the transmission, put the starter back in, and then we'll get working on the other components like the AC, power steering, the alternator, and of course the air filter. Torque this bolt to 130 foot-pounds. This is a trick I use with the belt on the alternator. It'll pinch. Hold it. You get the belt pinched like that, then you can torque it. Alright, now that I have all these belts on, bolts torqued down, these other front bolts are tightened down, I'm gonna go ahead and throw the radiator in. Now that we pretty much have everything back on, I'm gonna do these feel lines. I use a little bit of Vaseline, which is safe for the feel system, just on the tip of these knobs here, because they're really hard to get on and off. So if you ever have to take it off, again, this will help, and it helps getting them on right now. So. Alright guys, that about wraps it up for the head gasket video. I'm not going to throw the battery in right now. I have a couple other bits that I robbed off of this car that I need to replace. Also the headers, I didn't show putting those on, but it's just 6 14 mil bolts on the bottom. Just put those on just like how you took them off. So yeah, that's it for the head gasket video, guys. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, comment if you guys have questions, anything you guys have like advice on, let me know, man. I'm not the expert on this stuff, but I've been doing it for a while, so I can make them run at least, good. So moment of truth, got everything on, oil's in there, coolant's in there, battery's on. Put the steering wheel partially back on. We got power. Oh, no. Turn those off. Okay. Alright, I found a loose cable on the starter, so hopefully this is the moment of truth.